When I was a young boy, there was a fast casual noodle restaurant at the local mall that my mom and I always went to. It was called Mama Foo's, and at the time it was one of my favorite places to eat. There was one dish in particular that has stuck with me for more than half my life at this point, even though I haven't actually eaten it in probably 12 or 13 years. It featured super spicy, savory noodles topped with cold, juicy, refreshing cucumber. This specific combination of heat and relief was so weirdly impactful to my 14-year-old brain and how it thought about food that to this day I still try to recreate it from time to time. This is my latest iteration of that challenge to myself, so let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to do is poach a chicken breast, so I'll get a couple aromatics together for that. I'll crush and peel a couple cloves of garlic and take a few thin slices of this ginger. Those go into a big pot with about 2 to 3 quarts of water, along with a couple bay leaves and a couple big pinches of kosher salt. That pot is on high heat, so while that comes up to a simmer, I'll take a moment to do some other prep. I've got half a cucumber here that I'll cut into kind of rough matchsticks. To do that, I'll cut off the end and then cut it in half, and then cut each half into planks. Once I have my planks, I'll line those up on my board and slice through them to turn them into a relatively fine julienne. For some applications, I would choose to take the watery seeds out of the cucumber, but for this dish, I want to keep them. Those bites that instantly collapse into cooling, sweet cucumber juice are only going to reinforce the effect that I'm after here. If your knife skills are better than mine, you can certainly make these more uniform than I have, but these are fine for me. And keeping with the contrasting theme here, I'm gonna pack these up and save them in the fridge so that they're as cold as possible when I'm ready to serve. Alright, my water is up to enough of a simmer now, so I'm going to turn the heat all the way down to low and throw in my chicken breast. If it looks a little mangled there, it's because I got impatient waiting for the pack I bought to thaw out, so I ended up just ripping this one off the big block of still frozen meat. Do yourself a favor, folks, when you buy a big container of chicken parts, separate them before you freeze it. Future you will thank you. We're gonna shred this chicken later anyways, so not a big deal this time. You want to make sure this cooks gently, so you don't want the water to get hotter than, say, 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. The muscle protein will kind of cinch up and squeeze a bunch of juice out otherwise. While the chicken cooks, I'll go ahead and mix my stir-fry sauce for later. It's pretty simple in that there's not a lot of ingredients, but the flavor is going to be super complex and powerful. It starts with about 2 tablespoons of light soy sauce, and then that gets followed by 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of chinkiang vinegar, also known as Chinese black vinegar, and then a couple tablespoons of chili oil. You can use any chili oil that you like for this, but I'm using Lao Gan Ma chili crisp. It's spicy, savory, a little sweet, and it's got a little bit of that mala thing from the Szechuan peppercorns in there. I'm pretty sure everybody knows about this stuff by now, but if you don't, try to find it sometime because it really lives up to the hype. That's it for the sauce. Just gonna stir that up and give it a little taste. It's really strong, which is expected, but everything seems to be in balance with one another, so I'm calling that done and ready to go. While I have a little bit more time to kill, I may as well prep the rest of my ingredients for the stir fry. I've got 2 more cloves of garlic and an equally sized hunk of ginger that I'll mince up pretty finely and then put in this little dish for safekeeping. Then I have 2 green onions that I'll slice up. After I take off the root ends and anything at the tops that seems dried out or wilted, I'll cut these into about 2-inch pieces, having the white parts at the bottom just so they don't roll around. And then, just like the cucumber, I'll line these up and cut them into thin matchsticks. You might be sensing a theme here, and you're probably right. When making any noodle dish, it's good for all the other ingredients to also be kind of noodle-shaped. It makes them easier to incorporate evenly into the dish and makes it easier to pick everything up at the same time with a fork or chopsticks. My chicken breast is at 150 Fahrenheit internally now, so that's done and ready to come out. I'll place that on a clean plate, and while I wait for it to cool down for a sec, I'll fish out all the debris from my water. I'm gonna reuse this, and all the stuff in there would just get in the way at this point, and it's given up enough of its flavor by now. I want this chicken to cool down as quickly as possible, so I'll start tearing it into big chunks with my tongs and a fork. If I let it come down to room temperature naturally, it would probably stay a little juicier, but that's okay because 1, I don't want to wait, and 2, with the way we're going to prepare this, the juiciness of this chicken is not really going to be a big factor in how delicious this is. After not too long, it's still quite hot, but it has cooled down enough to where I can use my hands to finish shredding it up. I want to do a pretty thorough job here because I really want it to integrate well with the noodles later, just like the cucumber and the green onion. Any larger bits will stand out texturally in a way that I don't really desire. Doing this by hand also makes it easier to feel out for any bits of cartilage and stuff that I don't really want to chew on later. So with that out of the way, it's time to start cooking my noodles and putting this all together. My pot of water, which is now just dilute chicken broth, goes back on the heat, and I'll also get out my wok. If you don't have a wok, just use the biggest frying pan you have. When my water is just about to start boiling, I'll start preheating my wok over high heat as well. I've got some Chinese wheat noodles here. I'll throw a couple bunches of those in. I'm making enough for 2 portions today. Since these are fresh, they're only going to take about 3 or 4 minutes to cook. So after I give those a good stir, I'll turn back to my wok, which should be preheated, and hit it with a couple tablespoons of oil before I throw my chicken in. Make sure that your wok is hot and your oil is smoking before you put anything in. It's really easy to have sticking problems if it's not. I'll season that with some salt and white pepper and give that just a few seconds to get a little bit of color, and then I'll throw in all of my aromatics. If it's looking a little dry at this point, feel free to add a little bit more oil like I'm doing here. After a quick toss to get everything incorporated, my noodles are done, so I'll start fishing those out of the water. Much like a lot of Italian pasta dishes, I'm not going to strain my noodles. I'll put them in with whatever water is clinging to them, and then I'll save the water to adjust the consistency later. Once everything is in the wok and mixed up, I'll add my sauce from earlier. Doing it around the sides of the wok like this will sear the sauce and add a little bit of flavor. Stir and shake that vigorously to coat, and at this point, I can tell it's getting a little too thick, a little too sticky in there, so I'll add a little bit of my water, maybe 1/4 cup, and stir that in to bring it back to the consistency that I'm after. That looks good to me there, so it's time to plate up. Once I get this into the bowl, the final finishing touches will be to top this with some sesame seeds. You get bonus points if you want to toast them first, and then a whole bunch of my sliced cucumbers. And that's it. That's my attempt at the mall food of my childhood. I love this dish. It's got so much spice and savoriness balanced out perfectly by that cucumber oasis. Not many foods are more comforting and more satisfying to me than this one, and I hope you give it a try soon. If you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks.